Okay, so I'm going to show you guys some transfer techniques that you can transfer images. So this is going to be part of that um, pattern collage assignment. So I just got this magazine photo from the New Yorker, right? Just a random photograph. I traced the image, so you can see it's using tracing paper on top, tracing the shapes that you see of the shadows. All right. So this is just a line image that I did that with, and then you can see the difference when I fill that in. Okay. Now the thing that you need to remember about tracing that students often don't really think about is that you want to trace every single little change of direction in the shape. That way you make it very specific. You don't want to go really fast, you don't want to stylize, and that's how you're going to end up with something like what you're seeing here. When students go really fast, they end up with something that's cartoony, and you could have just drawn that. You don't need to trace it. Okay, so you want to have something like this. All right. So what we did here is we took that and we affixed it to the paper. Well, first I should say, what I did was I filled this, turned it upside down, right, so that it would have a positive image, filled in the dark with graphite pencil. 6B graphite pencil would be good. I think I used a 4B because I can't find the 6B, don't know where it went. And then affixing it to the page. And this has already been, I went over it a couple times. That's the first time, that's the second time. So you can use this more than once, and each time it'll fade and you'll get a bit of a progression that way, right? So the Rauschenberg example in the slideshow, he was doing something probably like this. And so I just used a quarter, and this is stuff that, I don't know, when I was a kid we used to do, so this is something that may be familiar to you. You kids nowadays, though, who knows what you guys do for crafts. Probably something a lot more sophisticated. So now I'm just rubbing again, so this will probably be a lot more faded. And you'll notice in the Rauschenberg, it was, he had a progression that he achieved by doing that, by rubbing it multiple times. It's just a quarter I'm using, something hard on a hard surface. I'm doing this on my sketch paper in the sketchbook just because it's an example. All these I'm not making a piece for you guys. So I think in the other demo, the wet dry demo, a lot of you guys thought I was just making a piece. I wasn't. I was showing you the technique. It wasn't a full-on composition, or didn't really have a lot of going on in the negative space. But anyway, so if I tape it like this, then I can lift it up and see if I got enough. And that is, you can see, is still third time, and it's maybe even darker. Maybe I wasn't rubbing on the same surface last time, so I'm on my drawing board this time. So you can see what a great transfer that makes, and I was able to do it 3 times. So a pattern is part of this assignment. So you've got to have a pattern, and a pattern is just a repeated motif. So you could use something like this as a pattern if you wanted to, okay? The other way of doing this is you can get it as a line image. So I can take the line image that I traced, and I can go over that with pastel on the back. trace those lines back. A lot of times when I do this, I'll do it with a ballpoint pen when I retrace, just so I can make sure that I'm getting the same lines over, or I'm not missing anything. When you're tracing your shapes, you have to remember that they've got to be enclosed shapes. Generally, you're not tracing, you won't have lines to describe things, you know, like in a line drawing. So it's the shape, these organic shapes that I'm tracing, natural shapes, that are going to help to describe the form. If you're real specific, the form is going to be implied. And I put pastel on the back, but you could do anything. You could put graphite or charcoal powder or whatever. It'll be your drawing. You want to be just as careful going over the lines as you were when you were tracing them the first time. The other thing you need to remember is don't invent when you're tracing these shapes. Don't fill in shapes. You don't need to fill them in. Because of the Gestalt principle, which is a psychological term you may have learned about in your psychology class, the brain will fill in the gaps. So you don't need to draw them in. Okay. So now you can see a red line version. Now you could do something like that, and you can then paint that in solid if you wanted to, with gouache or with the acrylic paint. You could also do a transfer like this onto a separate piece of paper. You could cut these shapes out with an X-Acto knife and then use it as a stencil, and you could either use spray paint or you can use a sponge and acrylic paint and dab over your stencil to do the same kind of idea. Okay, so those are all transfer techniques. These are, you know, you probably did something like this in your design class, I'm guessing, if you had design. And then the other thing we're going to do for transfer, we're going to do a transfer, and then we're going to do an image transfer, and then collage. Okay. So I have my 30 or 300 pound paper again. And this is an image. This is just printed out on on just regular printer paper. So we're going to see how that works. Okay, and you know, adhere that there. And then I printed up this image of the Acropolis, and but I did print it up on on baking parchment paper. So if I could just get that. Okay, so this is Baker's Signature unbleached parchment sheets. I would prefer bleached myself, so if you can get it white, that'd be great. But this isn't made for what we're doing, but this actually works out pretty good, and you'll see why in a second, okay? So this is the image we printed out, but this, you can kind of see is printed on that paper. It's really hard to see, and you think, oh well, there's no ink on there, but that's not the case, as you're going to find out. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint our acrylic medium on here, and then we're going to put this down, and then we're going to let it dry. So this is the acrylic medium I'm using. I think I showed this to you before, Novacolor Novaplex, but any acrylic medium is going to work for this, okay? Even a gel medium can work. And that's just going to go right on the paper. You can get little flaws in this, like there can be bleeds and things like that, and that can be part of the aesthetic if you want it to be, okay? I'm going to lay the image down. You can kind of see how it's already transferring. And now I'm just using a regular credit card. And I'm losing, and you can see, speaking of flaws, I'm pulling out some of that ink and it's smearing a little bit. And that's gonna dry, and then we'll peel that off, okay? The liquid medium has a tendency to do that more. The gel medium, not as much. So that will dry. I don't need this part at the bottom, so I'm going to show you how to do the other, just a regular collage. So I think it's best to paint on the onto the surface, again using the gel medium. Then I would use the squeegee again, the credit card, to make sure I'm getting all my air bubbles out. Don't need to worry too much if I'm getting the acrylic medium onto the picture, because you can also paint the acrylic medium over the picture once it's on there. And that worked out pretty good with just regular printer paper, okay? So because there's a requirement that you get pattern in here, this would be a way of, maybe you have paper with pattern on it that you can then collage on here, then maybe redraw that pattern with something else. Okay, so there's all kinds of things you can do. All right, okay, so those are all image transfer techniques, and then we'll wait for this to dry, and then we'll show you, we'll take it off and we'll see the little flaw there, but hopefully the rest of it is going to be okay. All right, okay, so now this is dry, completely dry to touch, and we're going to peel off the paper, and you can see my image transferred, and you can see the part where the squeegee marks were. It's got a kind of faded look to it, and that's nice. Okay. You can also draw on top of this. You can paint on top of it, just like the collage element here, where we can just, if we want to, we can just draw, or we can take the acrylic medium and some acrylic paint if we wanted to tint this and make it a different, using transparency, so that's a possibility as well. So those are all things that you can try for your collage pattern piece, and let's see what you can come up with. Okay? Okay.